welcome to the core session of today's, which is AI and Next Fintech Disruption. And this is something which is after the VC panels and investor panels that we have seen since morning. And this is something where rubber really meets the road. There's a huge disruption never seen before that's happening in the fintech industry today. And today we have a diverse set of speakers here, and from various dimensions there. And I'd like to quite quickly introduce them. So we have Harel, who is the managing partner at Kamino.ai. He's the investor into multiple startups. He's a board member, and he has been in various key roles, C-level leadership roles at multinationals, and he also was part of the operating partner at Silver Lake. So we are going to see a dimension from somebody who has worked from multinational sold companies as well as investing into companies from Harel. We have Santanu, who is Chief Technology Officer at NatWest, and also a former NASA scientist. So he's our go-to person today for understanding depths of AI and machine learning, and specifically he's going to talk about generative AI and the applications and how to choose the right problem to be solved using generative AI. We also have Peter, who is Managing Director of Banking and Business Applications in Microsoft, and he's going to be talking about strategy on democratizing the Gen AI or AI within the enterprise and externally as well, using low-code and no-code areas. We also have Denzil, who is Principal Architect IBM and Engineering Lead there, and he's going to talk about the implementation, accountability, traceability, explainability, governance part of Gen AI as well as AI as a whole there. So to begin with, I'll start with Santanu. And Santanu, you have been working in building data and AI products in the large enterprises. And you have seen the more failures and successes than any of us here. I just wanted to understand from your point of view, how do you essentially choose the right problem to solve? And specifically in the Gen AI Next Disruption, there is a lot of change and flux that's happening. There's a new innovations that are coming every now and then. There are more white papers that you see, and the conversion from the white paper to the actual mainstream is the speed at which we are having those conversions enormous. In that kind of a flux, how do you really navigate which problems are something that we can target, and whether the enterprise itself is ready for solving those problems? Because in past, in the other approaches before Gen AI, we have seen multiple failures just because either the organization was not ready, or the data was the data product on which the AI product was built was weak, or maybe the strategy itself was wrong. So Shantanu, over to you to kind of distill your experience in terms of readiness, finding the right problem to solve from the enterprise use cases there, and what are the levels of maturity that we need to have in our enterprise from the data build that is needing to be ready for the next gen AI revolution that we need, right? Over to Shantanu for this.
Thank you so much, Prashant. Great questions, right? I read it somewhere, I think it was a 2018 or 2019 data, that only 1 out of 8 data projects, 13% are successful. 7 out of 8 is a failure. I'm hoping that that does not also transmit over to the Gen AI initiatives. Part of the reason, as you have said, has been multifold, right? As a data science practitioners, we always sort of, if we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I think just being self-critical, that's our first big problem. Second thing has been that a lot of the data scientists are trained as scientists and not as a business leader who go and solve business problem, and looking at a customer from if you think of a digital ecosystem, you should always look at a problem from customer inward, starting with the customer journey, and not from a problem outward, that I have a cool data science problem and therefore let me go solve it, right? Leave those aside. Those are going to be the enterprise challenges that one needs to deal with, irrespective of whether it's Gen AI or just regular AI modeling. In Gen AI, it adds actually to an interesting dimension. So I was thinking about how to simplify the whole process. Look at the customer journeys, look at the toolkits you have, all of that. But then how do you really refine? Suppose that gives you a set of, and I'll give you my real example from where I work. looking at the lens from a customer journey, we had 400-ish problems that everyone wanted to do a Gen AI solution for, right? Obviously, you don't do 400 problems, solve 400 problems at the same time, right? And you also have to make sure that you succeed in your first few problems, because if the first 5 are failure, your organization's adoption of Gen AI would significantly slow down. So I came up with this simple framework, right? Ask 2 questions when you're looking at a problem. Does this task occur in enough frequency? The reason for that is, this is very important, is that there needs to be adequate training data available for training the model. So unless the task is happening in enough frequency, right, it would not be the first one to tackle. So, for example, you can probably create your annual reports using Gen AI, but because it happens only once a year, there may not be enough data to go do that using your own data, right? Second thing, the second filter that I apply is, are the outputs validatable through a human curation process, right? Because in the early days, it's extraordinarily important that the organizations check if the Gen AI outputs are consistent with what humans would expect, right? Not what a machine would give, but what your customers would expect. Because if there is a mismatch there, the adoption of a Gen AI product, be it a chatbot, be it a customer recommendation system, or be it something else, would probably not be high. You would face problems, right? In short, what I would say, if the task requires effort to execute, right, but it is relatively easier to validate, you might start with, you might think it's a good candidate. And using similar filters, we have it actually bring down the 400-ish to about 20-ish. It turns out when you use those filters, it's actually a very deep and narrow filter. So that's what has worked for us. We tried multiple types of filter, proximity to the customers, hardness of the problems, and it boiled down that these 2 simple rules are actually reasonably effective as a starting point. Obviously, once you broaden up the scope, once you have the first 10, 20 problems, you'll start getting more mature and start tackling other problems. But to start with the simpler ones that has high impact, I think that's one of the filters that has worked out for us.
Thank you, Santanu. So, Harel, next question is to you. Now, you have seen similar lines, actually, because we have seen a lot of AI startups coming up. Some of them are applications of the AI stack readily, and some of them are really solving some engineering areas by doing LLM plus, right? Now, as an investor, you probably have invested into AI startups right at the beginning, as well as in the new era with Gen AI as a context there. So have you seen impact on your investments when these new technologies or new waves coming in? And do you anticipate that because of the flux in this area, or the amount of innovation that's happening, some of those become irrelevant, some of those become more important, some of those, and this is something which is part of the investment as a risk, but specifically in the Gen AI space, where we have seen the cycles reduce from the white papers to the actual implementations. So what's your view? How do you make the choice between the right investment into Gen AI? One of the aspects that Shantanu told about is getting the right problem, solving the right problem, making sure that we are ready to solving the right problem. But the same question, if you look from the different dimension, which is from an investor's angle into Gen AI stack there, and you have been interviewing and interacting with a lot of startups as well. So what's your experience in terms of heightened risk because of the technology flux, as well as the heightened opportunity that this particular space presents? So Harel, some of the aspects and dimensions in that world definitely will help us to understand from investor dimension, how does this problem look like?
Yeah. Look, Prashant, I don't think that there's a single boardroom in the world, not in the US, but all over the world, where AI is not becoming the first or the second topic to talk about. Every company that I interacted with, not on the investment side, but on the strategic, the large company are going to use the technologies, our insurance, banks are all trying to understand what it is and how to use that. So there is an amazing amount of pent-up demand to use that. But at the same time, the approach is a little bit schizophrenic in a sense that it's because the AI or for that specific foundation models or the LLMs are a different paradigm in writing software, where you don't actually write lines of code. If there's a problem, one of your people know exactly what the line, where the line or where the module, the faulty module is. People are still trying to get used to understanding what is this whole tool. And if you look at that, there are certain things that are kind of low risk and maybe high return, certain things that are higher risk and even higher return. And this is something that people are trying to wade into and try it over time. So the easiest thing to do, and I think OpenAI, Microsoft, Google did a great job at that, is really changing the user interface, the user experience, right? Moving from dropping down menus and clicking radio boxes or radio buttons to NLP and discussion with the system. That is something that every company is open to do. I'm sure we'll see, how it goes, but I no reason to assume that this is going to be a problem. As you go into the next level, this is where people are trying to get something out of AI that has not been tried before. There's going to be a shortage of skilled jobs, a huge shortage in the next 10, 20 years. And people are trying to use AI system to really suck in this knowledge and really function as the next member of a team, of investment team, core banking team, FP&A, finance organization in large companies. All those things are things that AI can provide huge return. But we are very early. We're 8 months into, 8 months ago, nobody was talking about AI in those boardrooms. Now everybody is, and I think they're going to keep talking about it and start experimenting that over the next several years. And it's going to take 10 years for the potential to be realized. But issues of bias, privacy, hallucination, a bunch of other psychological problems, like they call it Grace's maxim, where the AI system that lives in a world of text only, and at least as of today, still doesn't have, with the exception of a little bit of a multimodal, doesn't have understanding of numbers per se, doesn't have a very solid understanding of how you speak the word, how you hear the word, and really LLMs don't have legs and eyes and ears, so they don't roam the streets like people do. They bring a bunch of interesting errors that I think that the next step to really master will be to squelch those errors, minimize them, and increase the efficacy of whatever answer they give. And I think that that's going to be the next frontier. There is going to be a lot of experimentation, and we see insurance companies, logistics companies, a bunch of other physical world corporations that are trying to use that. But as you pointed out, the stuff is making its way from academic papers. The most famous probably is Attention is All You Need, that gave rise to the generation of transformers. And how much you implement out of that is getting dealt with on a daily basis. So the speed of innovation is amazing. And I think everybody feels really good about that. When those things are going to become part of the playbook of corporations, I think we need to give it probably, during next year, you're going to see a very strong broadening of the usage. But again, it could take a long time for us to completely understand what we've built.
Right. Thanks, Harel. So it was a great insights about, from an investor angle, how do you look at the space, although the flux is enormous and the level of understanding that is needed from the investor angle is also going to be a very different dimension here. Having said so, there's a lot of potential, and we are just kind of maybe a second after the midnight for the whole day on this AI revolution. It's going to disturb the fintech there. So Denzil, I'll come to you now about the classical approaches towards generative AI applications. This face a tremendous difference in terms of the regulations, the compliances, the guardrails that are needed here. And we are faced with a lot of new challenges in this area, right? you have been working in architecting these things for a long now, and we'd like to hear from you the new challenges that you are seeing in these areas. How do you tackle with such a huge force the innovations happening, and then how do you really look at the sandbox safe approaches to develop these things and see where exactly, and then have more safer approaches to launch these products, and then look at the compliance and regulations in more closer sense there. So Denzil, over to you for that aspect.
So yeah, as some of our guests have spoken about how this industry has evolved. Well, even the machine learning space started off as the Wild West about 8 or 10 years ago. Everybody I met, wanted to be a data scientist, right? And they were pretty much rolling out models day in and day out, by just looking at your false positives and true positives and how accurate they are. But the subsequent business value from those was only actually realized many, many years later. And after that, when there were fines on bias, on having to explain why your loans have a decision that was taken, was there any bias to a community in those loans, etc. It's only then that people started paying attention to the regulatory aspect of it, saying, okay, my data scientist has gone and developed a model. I've gone and made a credit score decision based on that, right? But where's my explainability based on the decision, right? So currently what we see is for the enterprises that are using AI in general and machine learning, they have essentially got a lot of auditability in place, wherein if a decision has come in front of, let's say, a loan officer, or it's a decision on an insurance underwriting, right? They have explainability saying, my decision was based on this, right? And there are currently even some platforms in place, that we often architect and talk to our clients about, is basically having the governance of it. So if your data scientist is releasing a model, right? Does it drift over time? Is there some inherent bias in the model due to reasons they have not realized? There can be a correlation between some data that you may never have thought about it, right? So it is unintentional, but the regulators don't care about whether it's intentional or unintentional, right? Now coming to the Gen AI space, right? I like what Santanu mentioned as his framework, right? Because if you go to any enterprise and you spread across the department saying, hey, we have this 400 or 500K that we need to sponsor for a POC, you're essentially going to get 110 ideas, and everybody is going to say it's equally important. So we are essentially doing the same thing that he mentioned. Try and get a group together and evaluate it, as an open system. What is your, highest return with the lowest risk? Okay. And will it be used? Okay. And one thing we are often seeing in the generative AI space is that it is ending up being something where you essentially you're trying to show it in front of your employee as a first, so like internal use cases, think the productivity of your developer, think, in terms of customer care, right? So you essentially have your employee who's sitting there, right, who can vet the information that is being produced. Okay. The second pattern that we often see coming up is in the event that you still want to go and put it in front of your employee, right? Are you grounding that response based on data that is validated, which brings me to our pattern called the RAG pattern. It's so common now, they just call it RAG all over. And I recommend you call it retrieval augmented generation, okay? Because not everybody knows what a RAG is. So that essentially, it tries to mitigate your risk a little bit by at least grounding the response or the hallucinations potentially, right? Based on data that you have confirmed from your enterprise, okay? Because getting a response from Gen AI is essentially like talking to a very, very skilled 10-year-old child, okay? So if you ask it for, let's say, my colleague sent me a picture, it was so funny. She essentially asked the Gen AI to generate an image with salmon, right? And the Gen AI image essentially had floating steaks of salmon all over the river, So you have to tell it that, I want live fish, right? So, and that's where the prompt engineering has come into picture, right? So it has a lot of potential, but it's going to take time, as Harel mentioned, for the developers and the AI engineers to understand how to speak to the system, right? What are the common pitfalls based on the model that you are choosing, etc., right? So that's where I see it right now. absolutely need the governance aspect of it. So, based on what grounding of the data is your Gen AI responding to, and to continue with the guardrails that we have all along with the AI and machine learning in general, where we have explainability back to the regulators saying, if I have made a decision, right, it is grounded based on these facts. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, Denzil. And in fact, hopefully we'll be having more compliance and regulations and guardrails which are regulator driven, like we have for data regulations soon coming up in a more rigid format. So the initial discussion that have been already started there. Now, Peter, next questions to you. In fact, you have been strategizing and trying to kind of understand the low-code and no-code environments. And I'll say that the first evolution that happened on the OpenAI, ChatGPT to me is a low-code environment for a common person, which was never possible earlier. So you can code using your English language. You don't need any kind of a programming language there, and you can actually do things, wonderful things. And that's where when you put a tool in hands of creative guys, which is having such a strong kind of a force there, it changes the dynamics of innovation completely, right? And in an enterprise, we have low-code environments and no-code environments, which traditionally have been used by the developer teams, maybe to some extent the BAs and some extent the functional guys. But there are so many limitations on those tools that are both end of spectrum, something which is rigid, something which is too flexible, and then it becomes a headache to manage those things, right? And in context of Gen AI and AI, right, having intelligence as building blocks for to the next innovation revolution becomes kind of a big force. So once we build those tools, once we essentially put the guardrails there, when we are comfortable to launch these products as a building blocks within the enterprise, how do you see democratization of usage of these will in line with what the ChatGPT did to the OpenAI revolution? What will be the enterprise strategy in terms of getting these tools out in a shape and form where it becomes Lego building block, and any even newcomer can essentially be having some functional understanding, can start using them, building flows and workflows, which will essentially create much more seamless value, much more faster there. So Peter, over to you about how do you strategize the democratization of AI in the enterprise environment with the methods like low-code, no-code environment, and then maybe many more. So over to you, Peter, on those dimensions.
Thanks, Prashant. And I think sort of building on what's been said, like Santanu, where we start is on the business value. Like what are those user stories? What are the journeys? What are we going to be doing around that? And then Denzil also bringing in the guardrails as far as you go across it. But realistically, the idea that we can have, I'm not a big fan of the citizen developer term, but the idea that we've got a team that's business focused, not IT, they're not developers, but they can then use these tools that are low code with Gen AI in the background or other AI in the background, that they can then accelerate what they can do from a workflow perspective, from an app perspective, from utilization. So we can move to, if you don't have an action that's tied to an insight that's coming out of AI, there's no value you can necessarily tie to it. You can't measure what that's actually doing. Again, taking into consideration all of the responsible AI pieces, making sure that you've done as much as you can do to eliminate bias. But the idea is that we can actually take something and leverage the Gen AI pieces to help with those workflows. So describe the workflow rather than necessarily have to execute it. So what you're doing is 80% of the work is done, and 20% is all you've got left to do in order to make the connections that you need to make, and the actions are actually coming across, or describing an app that you need to have that may have some workflow tied behind it. That ability now, from that ability to have a business IT function that doesn't require developers, it also from the AI side doesn't require Python or data scientists, and that you're serving that data up in intelligence, creating those insights, but you've got an action, you've got a workflow and control around it. That's the other piece, especially in financial services. I think Denzil leaned into that. the idea that, if I've got something that's accumulating data from different places and giving me an insight, that insight may have restrictions to it based on where those data are coming from. So that ability to make sure that we can wrap without having to write this monolithic set of code in order to wrap it easily and have some workflow tied to it, so you can take action and you can get value out of it.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much.
Prashant, with your permission, I'll tell a little bit of a story, right?
Sure.
To make it interesting for our friends in those who are listening, right? In the turn of last century, the most powerful person in American corporation was the CEO, and the second most powerful person was also the CEO, the Chief Electricity Officer. So the different parts of the Tennessee Valley Corporation produced at, don't know the exact number, but say 120 volts, 50 hertz. Someone else produced at 110 volts, 60 hertz, and so on. When all those electricity came to a plant, there was a CEO who was the data scientist equivalent, who used all his knowledge to step up, step down, transformer, and all that stuff, right? And this was a gigantic effort in order to make electricity usable in an enterprise. Today's low-code version is you go inside the building and plug your machine, right? So, and that has driven a lot of the productivity gain in the past 100 years, right? So I suspect what will happen, and with the risk of saying that we data scientists will be less useful in the future than we are now, not obsolete, hopefully. But this will be the equivalent of the second most, the Chief Electricity Officer's job, right? Which is once the low-code version comes in, right? You of the data sciences, right? You really have the toolkits in the hand of people who are business experts. So, for example, someone who is a top-end cancer researcher and wants to really look at the data on breast cancer himself or herself would not have to go learn Java, Python, and whatnot in order to do basic exploratory analysis. But it's a business using the toolkit, democratizing the usage of it will eventually drive the biggest benefit out of the AI.
Absolutely, Shantanu.
And just to add on to that, actually, I think something you also said, Prashant, that really struck me is, you talked about ChatGPT and the coding inside of that, is that, Microsoft, we're doing a ton of work around the concept of a UI is changing, so that it's actually becoming more aware. Can we make the conversation the UI? Can we make the conversation now that experience that somebody has? So I don't have to teach someone, all those systems that are sitting in the contact center that only, specific people have trained to do. Like, do I need to have someone else? It's too expensive to train the entire branch operations team. So can I actually wrap those and create a conversational UI so that they don't have to be trained? I want to do this. So I'm going to ask the system, how do I do it? Okay, here are the prompts. Here's what I need to do. And then have that actually execute into the backside. That, I think, is also going to be a transformative piece of work that's going to happen, I think, very, very soon, to be honest.
Thanks, Peter. So as a part of IN48 Partner Edition, we have been interacting with a lot of startups, and we have seen every other startup having some play on GenAI here. So we have Harel here today, who has been interacting with day in and day out with investments in startups. And Harel, while doing the prep for this call, I think we went into some of the areas where, if you want to kind of classify these innovations, some are on applicative side, some of .ai, which are just kind of wrapping up the core and then creating new utilities there. Some of our really engineering solutions, which are going to be kind of a GenAI plus, where there's a ready and hardcore research that backs that particular startup with a very different value proposition altogether. And there are certain areas, then you apply those to various different fields, right from the healthcare to the AI, the fintech, and to whatnot. So from your vantage point, Harel, how do you see the space in terms of I'll say, layering and segregation. So what kind of buckets that you will put these innovations in as an investor, and where do you find the value personally, as well as a kind of an institutional investor overall in the industry will be looking at? So where do you see the dynamics? Because some of these use cases are going to be kind of a vaporizing very fast, because those spaces will be taken care by probably inbuilt tools within the Microsoft, inbuilt tools within the Google, and some of those use cases may be short-lived. Some of those opportunities may be short-lived, and some of those opportunities will be something which is very vertical across the industry, and that's where it is more kind of protected investment. So Harel, based on your vantage point, how do you see this from an investor angle, where exactly these buckets are, and which one is personal favorite of yours?
So look, I spent my formative years at Microsoft. I ran the mobile division back long time ago, but the CEO then was Bill Gates, and it was always talking about building a moat. You know, we have to make sure that there's a barrier to entry. You know, I took this idea. We took this idea with us. All of us spent a lot of time at Microsoft, but I think 95%, and I'm talking to a lot of companies, but 95% of the companies we see are definitely are upping the ante in terms of how easy, as Peter mentioned, how easy it is for the decision maker, you know, the chief investor, but they're doing it by relying on a technology that we don't think that they will be able to master as authors, as generators. They will be good users of that. So we don't think that ChatGPT or the equivalent on the Google and the Facebook side are going to be given or are going to be driven by smaller companies. This is classical case where you have a bunch of APIs to the big guys, the big companies that spend a lot of money on training those LLMs. And this is great. But again, from an investor point of view, our goal is to return in the investment to our limited partners. As an investor, that's not very exciting. The next step is a mixed bag. It's really the picks and shovels of the business, right? So you have over the last 8 months, there were all kinds of interesting companies that came up with technologies to allow you to adopt to those things. For instance, ChromaDB and Pinecone vector databases, you know, are very talked about technologies in the space. But in reality, we think that over time, this functionality is going to go to the more tried and true technologies like SQL databases, relational database, and vector database is going to be great, but it's going to be a feature of something that already has a very good understanding. Relational database, everybody understands, or everybody needs to understands that. And vector database is really a small jump off that. But more promising picks and shovels, if you will, are the bias restraints, the prompt engineering technologies. You know, one of the things that we are really excited about is retrieval augmented generation, or the RAG system, to allow you to compel the system to tell you, I don't know, if they don't know. I mean, if you want, try to, a good experiment is try to ask the LLM, who was this mayor of Monrovia, California in 1964? You'll get about 15 answers. None of them are right. And the reason is that you have to understand how LLM works. LLMs live in a world of text. You know, Monrovia has the distinction of being the 1,000th largest city in the United States. So there's really nothing written about that. Everybody knows exactly who was the mayor of New York or Mumbai or Washington, D.C. since inception. But nobody knows exactly where Monrovia is, or not too many people know, let alone who was the mayor. So LLM simply don't know that. Bringing this information, which exists somewhere, to the foreground is a very important thing. Understanding how do I solve a conflict when one LLM says one thing and another LLM says another thing is interesting. Privacy is definitely interesting. So these are the picks and shovels that are interesting. The next level is really solving solutions for enterprise companies. This is something that Peter and Santanu talked about. in a sense of skipping, no disrespect to the data scientists, skipping them and going directly to the people that understand the problem and they speak their own language. They're not gonna cave in or bend to how the system or the computer system would like to hear about this problem. They like to stay in their own domain. And this is where we have technologies like NERF, Neural Radiance Field, which is something that allows you to stitch together, or not stitch together, but create a 3D image out of 2, 3, 4 2D pictures just because you understand what it is. So a logistics company that wants to find all the yellow letters in the warehouse is an interesting problem to solve. Can you throw it on LLM or AI system? Can you ask the LLM, the open system to, or the AI system to track or track expense reports from employees, including finding areas of fraud or areas that are not categorized right? I mean, these are menial jobs that if every employee that filled up expense report doesn't think it's really the pinnacle of their career, right? This is, as far as they're concerned, it's time wasted. It's time wasted because other system can do it, and that's going to be the focus. And the holy grail, short of AGI, is really autonomous agents, where you trust the system enough that you let it free reign. Maybe every once in a while you want to double check that. Maybe another AI system can check it. But overall, this is something that it means that technology has got to a level that companies can, for instance, eliminate inventory management, or eliminate warehouse management, or eliminate T&E experts. Now, I'm not going to get into the human aspect of change jobs. Nobody's going to end up on the street. Everybody's going to find a higher level job. But there's a bunch of things that we don't have, or humans don't want to do. The system can do it much better.
Thanks, Harel. So with that, I want to switch to Santanu with this context, because Harel has been giving various areas in which he has seen the interest and various buckets there on the startups. And we have, in fact, in InnovateIN48 Partner Edition also, we have seen very, let's say, innovative startups coming in with new value at very fast pace, right? So Shantanu, within the large banks or enterprises, right, the speed of innovation is something which is probably directly proportional to the momentum that they currently have, and nothing else apart from that. So if you have less momentum as an organization, then these innovations are going to be more slower there. So Shantanu, given the situation in the Gen AI space, which the flux is enormous and there's a new value that is getting created every day, how do you think about buy versus build versus partner decisions as a technologist, not as a strategist, but or as an investor or as an enterprise decision maker? But let's say Harel comes with a broad spectrum of innovations. How do you look at that as an opportunity for larger enterprise? Because we have seen a very dramatic shift in India about startups moving to enterprise plumbing, and that's something which is going to be a larger, I'll say, a value that the fast-paced innovations can bring in. At the same time, there is a lot of resistance for them, because they essentially need to prove themselves in terms of robustness in order to be part of an enterprise as a vendor or as a partner, as a buy decision, etc. Right? So Shantanu, based on your view on the innovation within the enterprise and the space of innovation that is happening in the smaller, I'll say, crucibles, which are really brought and bought for the innovation here. What do you think about the buy versus partner decisions or invest decisions from enterprise level? Do you have any view about that?
Yes, I do. And I'll try to contextualize it as much as I can. So it really boils down to a couple of things, right? How close to the customer you are, the decisions that are the Gen AI technology. So let me start with two things. One is, let's look at the technology itself. And then the second, because we are a regulated industry, let's take a look from what I would call as the risk and control framework, right? Broadly broken down into those two. In terms of the buy versus build, as far as the technology itself is concerned, I would look at a couple of criteria and try to build a simple framework using how close to the customer are we? What kind of outputs are you generating? Will those outputs give customers more information, or will the outputs now go close enough to the customers to essentially make decisions for them? So for example, you have a product catalog. A customer is asking, saying that I have $10,000, what should I invest on? Would you give the answer saying that these are the products we have and talk about 4 of them? Or would you say, given your situation and based on your earlier investment history, I'll tell you to invest in this fixed income securities, right? It gets to the level of spookiness that you want to introduce, right? In my opinion, in the first few years of it, would still be having an advisor who may himself use an LLM internally, but the advice would still come from a human being, right? So that's the first choice from a technology perspective. And the third one, the third leg of that choice is what kind of data am I exposing to? A buy versus build kind of scenario, right? If I'm using, for example, OpenAI to train my models, whereas the guarantee that my customers' data would not be used for training further, as much as there is a great deal of terms and condition attached to it, saying that would not be used and so on and so forth, right? As well as the fourth one, saying that the original model where it was trained on, how much of that data itself was privacy preserved, right? Free of bias and so on and so forth. So I'll use this 3 or 4 frameworks and 3 or 4 questions to sort of make the buy versus build decisions. On the other hand, there is an area where I would actually spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we can sort of buy and quickly adopt, is because this is a hard problem, because the decisions and today's LLM technology is essentially a black box, right? So the decisions made by an LLM as well as the outcome of it are black boxes. And because you don't know if it is doing a harm, in the event it does a harm, there's no way to backtrack it and say what caused it. So in terms of finding that out, if there are good technologies, for example, in the areas of observability and explainability, I'd probably go third party or start exploring third parties, because the banks internally ourselves would not be able to match the speed of innovation that exists outside the bank and try to build things in-house, right? So on a technology perspectives, it'll be a mixed set of decisions based on those 4 questions that I just mentioned. On my gut feel is that on the risk and control side, we'll build a framework, but a lot of the toolkits would probably be coming from outside, which I'm sure someone like Harel would be loving that answer.
I love it all the time.
Thank you, Santanu. So building on top of that, what Santanu said was essentially, if you want to allow a partner or other technologies within the enterprise ecosystem, the data guardrails, compliance regulations become a big challenge. And that's where whenever a startup approaches a larger bank or larger institution, that becomes the first question. And Peter, I think we have been discussing about these areas, not just within the enterprise boundaries, but across the enterprise boundaries, about how the foundational problem about sharing the data in a privacy-preserving manner becomes more important, more central. And probably that is the key where we may see data marketplaces on which probably new innovations and third-party, partners can build on top of it, right? So we may, right now, we don't see that much. We have data marketplaces, we have decentralized data marketplaces, we have some like advanced examples in some nook and corners, but it is not being generalized because of the core issue about how do we do privacy-preserving compute as well as across the enterprise and within the enterprise there. So Peter, you have been working on some of the areas. So if you can just put some of the lights on this dimension, which it becomes kind of a first hurdle, even before story starts or even before discussion start, it becomes kind of first hurdle there. So Peter, over to you for putting some light in this area. Peter, you're on mute.
It happens every time. So we actually at Microsoft, we've got some clients, and there's several problem sets to this, because the banks, compliance teams, the risk teams, they're not going to want to share this data, like the what do we call them, the crown jewels, or that data that's very, very proprietary to themselves, without a lot of assurance around where that data is going. So I've had banks approaches to say, well, can we just combine the insights coming from our on-premise system with the insights that are now in your cloud system, perhaps with others? And that really doesn't work, because you can't aggregate and aggregate, right? You can't get insights out. You can combine them, but they're just literally just basically appending them all together. What we need to do is a confidential compute platform that we can bring that data in, combine it with tokenization throughout, so that you've got protections around identity and things like that you're bringing the data to. That's when you can start having these where that accumulated insights, and we've done some projects with some of our clients around this, around loyalty and things like that, where we're bringing together a bank with possibly other banks, but also now other retail businesses and service businesses and things like that, where all of a sudden now you can start getting patterns, you can start getting those insights around it, making sure, as we all said, you've got the responsible AI behind it, you've got the bias rules and things like that behind it, to make sure that you've got those pieces in place. But if you can bring them to a central platform, have all of that intelligence coming across it, where you still have the security into it, so no one can access data that they don't own, but they can access insights that are accumulation of that data around it.
Absolutely, Peter. And hope when we had this first wave of blockchain based innovations, which was composability on the trust factor, some kind of a fabric on composability of AI intelligence itself will definitely kind of be really helpful. But there is a bottleneck here, which you just spoke about, and there doesn't seem to be a very, let's say, universally acceptable solution here. It is more about finding, hey, within my ecosystem, where does it really work there? So, Harel, you have seen various hype cycles in your investment journey, right? We have seen previous to GenAI and AI lifecycle, we had this blockchain, I'll say, democratization or decentralization of like TradFi to DeFi changes there, right? Now, there are two different fabrics here. One is a trust fabric, which is essentially the decentralized blockchain fabric that we have. Another area, GenAI, is an intelligence fabric there. Now, I know there are not many examples here, but do you believe that the composability of these two technologies, trust and intelligence, is going to spur one more innovation? And when you look at your portfolio, do you see a combination on composability, whether let it be the RAG approaches, or whether it be knowledge graphs, or let it be federated learning, let it be other technologies, building blocks of technologies? Do you see a large number of combinations there? Because usually startups will follow, I'll say, more safer path, saying that, okay, this is my use case, this is somewhere I'm having a success, so let's just stick to it and then create some more value with that engine. And the other approach is, hey, let's take a look at this engineering problem and then do kind of an R&D centric thing. Now, if you look at your investment, I'll say, vantage point there, how many of these startups do you really see kind of touching the core of the engineering piece and trying to combine various flavors of emerging tech to build something which is a new business model, which is not seen before? And I know that this question is essentially something that we will ask every time there is a major disruption that's coming in, and there is always a lag between the ability to for innovators to compose, because the industry will need some time to build those Lego pieces there. So, Harel, based on your vantage point, based on what you have seen so far, do you see that there's a major kind of a push from the innovation startups where they are looking for engineering, R&D, and truly generating a different value? Or it is more about currently in the day, maybe in the early morning, we are just focused on leveraging things, and maybe in the afternoon, probably we'll focus on more on the R&D side. So any flavors that you're sensing in the investment space, where exactly the focus is, and where exactly more successful startups are, where exactly the unicorns may come up, there? Is it more about solving the larger scale problems and being the first to move forward, or then look into this and sit back and ask a very fundamental question? Is this something which we can solve as a harder problem rather than just focusing on the smaller and larger problems which can probably monetize more faster? Again, answer to this is more kind of a common sense for some of the startups, because they always go with the very optimal way to make wealth there. But do you see investments happening into the area where multiple emerging tech flavors are coming together for engineering piece of it, or is more applicative that currently and in the current time that you have seen there?
So first, a couple of things that let me unpack the question. First, let's talk about investment in general. We're coming after really a sea change event in investment that hasn't happened over the last 40 years. First, we have inflation. It's part of the discussion now. Last time we had it was 1974 and 75. So we're talking about a long time since we had this problem. And over the last several years, money was really cheap, zero interest or below zero interest in real terms. There was no issue. There was a bubble, right? Everybody was throwing money on anything that seemed remotely like a good idea. But at the same time, through all the fads and bubbles, if you look at the last 40 years, you had some meaningful revolutions. You had the client-server revolution. You had the internet. You had or the World Wide Web. You had the mobile revolution. You had the emergence of data science. I don't count DeFi as part of that, because while it's a good idea, the operational or the interaction between company that has no trust in each other requires regulators sometimes. And if their whole idea is to do away with the regulator, this is a political problem that I think is going to take a very long time to solve. So we're coming into 2023, 2024 with much less appetite to invest in small startups, which is why we started Kameno AI. The VCs that have to lick their wounds and deal with companies that were invested at unrealistic valuation in 2021, 22, this is what they need to do. They need to shore up their operation and actually think about how to return money to their investors in the next 10 years. It's much easier to start from scratch and look at AI companies that really build something. And I think that the spillover, the leak, however you want to call it, of Llama into the open source community, Facebook Llama or Meta Llama into open source community, was really an event that started the market, the open source market, and the smaller players in the market, started them on a trajectory that allowed them to solve real problems. So, Peter mentioned confidential computing. We're really, really excited about that. We think that confidential computing, which is actually boils down to taking part of the silicon on the CPU and really allowing companies to share information that they don't want to, and they don't want to open the whole kimono. They want to open specific parts of that. Is a great thing that the technology, that the ecosystem will benefit from. Dealing with solving the gap or the tension between regulation and LLM. How do you make sure that if you incorporate LLM into HR's operation, for instance, you don't have a bias? And there are many good examples where the systems have bias that is built in. There was an experiment where the LLM or the AI system, I won't say which one it was asked to write a graduation speech for a Harvard graduate. And it was all about innovation and how the world is going to change, etc. And then the system was given a task to write a graduation speech for a Howard University graduate. Howard University is the largest Black university in the United States. It was all about equality and diversity. So you can see that even though the systems do not have a malicious bias, they have a bias nevertheless, because they just gobble up the information on the web. And the internet is full of biases. And so the question is, do you keep it out of the training data set? Do you train the whole system and then try to figure out whether the system is really biased and correct that? How do you deal with all these issues? These are really important issues that, like in every other a meaningful revolution in the last 50 years, you need large companies, the Google, the Microsoft, the IBMs of the world, but you also need a lot of small companies. And I can tell you today that if anything has changed, is really the pace of innovation. The pace of innovation in these companies is just amazing. And so I'm very optimistic about the not insignificant contribution that 2, 3, 4 folks and a cat in a garage can actually make towards really start building all the guardrails around what we know as AI systems or generative AI system or LLMs. I think there's going to be a lot of things that will be needed in order to do that. The other part is really the fact that most of the GPT, the generative pre-trained transformers, are living off text. How about time series data, right? In the banking system, you have time series data. In industrial systems like GE, you have the turbine is spitting out the data every second or sometimes every 10 milliseconds. And you need to be able to predict something out of that. That's not text per se. That's not, ingesting the information on the internet. But what we found out is when you squeeze 100 billion plus neurons into a system, you start getting all kinds of skills that you didn't plan for. GPTs were designed initially for translation. We are way, way, way off the reservation of that. Right now, all of us are using GPT for analysis or analytical results. In order to take that away from text into the world of pictures, multimodal as you call it, but also into the domain of numbers, you need more innovation. You need time series data, not just SQL databases. So you have a lot of things that you can innovate. And again, we're looking for, I think everybody else is looking for, the deep tech companies that you look at and said, well, if I can put that on my system, 1 + 1 will become 4. And that's what we're all about.
Thanks, Harel. So with that, I'd like to wrap up the panel now. And it has been great, deep discussions on various dimensions of Gen AI and next fintech disruption. And I'm sure that many more disruptions are going to come with Gen AI to its heart. And again, not all problems are solved. I think we have solved just the higher, the trust of that, and there is a deeper innovations that are still out there, which are going to be on the verge of discovery going forward. As a part of IN48, we have been working with startups which are in Gen AI space, and there are really interesting areas with hyper-personalization as well as customer support and innovations on those areas. And we are hoping that with this context, I think those startups who are listening in today's call essentially have got some more confidence on insights that their belief, the hard belief that they have jumped into generative AI is really the foundational way to go forward from here on. So with that, I really thank everyone on this panel to participate here on behalf of FIS and behalf of IN48 Partner Edition team. And hope to see you soon in our judging rounds in future, and more collaborations from VCs, Y Combinator's investors like you, Harel, and Santanu on technology side, and Peter on the study side, and Denzil from architecture side. And we have a lot of new things which are planned today with respect to the workshops. So please do take advantage of these workshops from our partners like IBM, Microsoft, as well as Heather and other guys here. So thanks, everyone. And it was great conversation today. Really looking forward for the collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.